Welcome back to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink, Tuesday, May 28th. Hope everyone had a great holiday weekend, enjoyed that extra day off yesterday, and had a chance to spend some time with family and friends. But we're not wasting any time getting back into the swing of things here at Podcast on the Brink. You know him as the coach from the Assembly Call, Brian Tonsoni. He's also the founder of Delphi Bracketology. He's back on Podcast on the Brink. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's the first day of summer vacation for the teachers here at Delphi, and what better way to start off summer vacation than talking a little Indiana basketball with you? So I'm doing really well. Thanks.
How was your holiday weekend? Do anything fun or just kind of hang out around the house?
I just hung out around the house. My son and his friends were over Saturday night, and we enjoyed some time together. But other than that, just relaxed. Much needed after a year of school. And so we're ready to play a little golf and visit some family all summer, and then hope this basketball season is better than last year. And that's what we're going to talk about, I guess, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to, obviously, you spend a lot of time with the Assembly Call and obviously with Delphi Bracketology, analyzing not just Indiana, but a ton of teams throughout the country. But Indiana has kind of been looked at least nationally, so far this offseason as one of the programs that's had a ton of success just in terms of the talent that they've been able to accumulate from the transfer portal. From a big picture perspective, where do you stand just kind of on what Indiana has been able to do this offseason in terms of the overhaul with the roster and the pieces that they brought in compared to what they lost and all that?
Well, Alex, I think this potentially is the best roster that Mike Woodson's had, and that's kind of difficult to say when you had Trace Jackson-Davis and Jalen Hood-Schifino, but you're talking depth of roster and athletes. And I think for what Mike Woodson wants to do with his offense is to get defense in rotation and then to play off of the rotation, whether that's through post-ups or middle ball screens. He has guys now that can attack off of kickouts. The pull-up game is big in Mike Woodson's scheme, and we saw that in Hood-Schifino at Purdue when he just went off. And you see it when Trey Galloway has his big games. They run that little Chicago handoff at the pinch post, and he gets in the lane with floaters, and that's been a really effective piece of Mike Woodson's game. Well, now you have several people, Miles Rice and the Carlisle and Tucker coming in from the high school ranks as McDonald's All-American, along with Galloway back. And then you supplement it with the shooter in Goody, who wants to play at Indiana. I think obviously shooting is going to be something we're going to talk about later. That is still a question mark for this team. But Mike Woodson obviously likes to score at the rim and score at the lane before taking too many threes. And he's got guys now that can do that. You have a premier postman in Ballo. And probably, Alex, the most important thing is you kept Renew and you kept Mbako, very talented offensive guys that know the system. So, in this transfer portal era where some teams are getting in 9, 10, 11 players, Indiana does have 3 or 4 guys who have played some, and you can mesh them together. That's what happened in year 2 when Woodson had a 4 seed and his best roster. He had some veteran players. I think that roster was a little more experienced than this roster. With all of those guys coming back and your point guard situation. So the inexperience is an issue, but there's no doubt, credit to the athletic department for setting up the NIL collectives and working with the NIL collectives and the donors and the staff, because all of that combined was able for Indiana to get a roster that has 9 wings, Alex, which is maybe a telltale of a little bit of a shift in the offensive philosophy, and only 3 post players right now, according to my count and where you put them in traditional numbers. So kudos to the staff. I mean, if you're going to turn this around, this is the kind of roster that is needed to do that. But I'm going to wait and see, after 3 years of, okay performances from Mike Woodson led basketball teams, there's a lot of work that has to be done this summer to get ready to play the first game in November and win like you're supposed to right away, instead of waiting until later in the season. But the roster construction has been fantastic, and puts Indiana and Coach Woodson in a position to be successful.
I know we've talked so much about last season and what went wrong, and whether it was a coaching problem or roster construction problem. I think a little bit of both kind of falls in there. But when you look at last season and everything as a whole, and kind of look forward to the season that's coming up, what do you feel like were the most, like the one or two most important things that Indiana had to get better at in terms of a roster from last season? And do you feel like they did address those issues?
Yeah, well, there's two different things for me. I still want shooting at 3 or 4 spots. And Mbako came on late in the year, and Goody was a nice addition there. But the two guys that came in that we like, Rice and Carlisle, their numbers weren't great, but you can't really say that until you see it improve. You don't know if they're going to be good shooters. So that's still a question mark. I think the lack of shooting has been said over and over again, almost way too much by all of us. The volume of threes, the taking of threes, the just not emphasized. And you see that in all of basketball, where there is still pick and roll, there's still low post play in a lot of NBA and college game, but there are a lot of 3-point shots coming off of that, and Indiana didn't do that. And I think that's offensively. They were 105th in KenPom offensively. So something didn't work when you bring in an NBA center in Ware, and you bring in a McDonald's All-American that was a Duke recruit, and you have your veteran point guards back, your veteran guards back, then something didn't really work, whether it was scheme, roster, or just what you emphasized. When Indiana started winning, they were played a little more free, a little more confident, and they were taking quicker threes in transition. They were sharing the basketball. I think sometimes we as coaches, we get into a mode where you're teaching the right thing, but you're overemphasizing something. It looked like Indiana offensively wanted to make plays. Catch the ball, go make a play. Catch the ball, go make a play. You saw that with the former Hoosier Caleb Banks. You saw it with and all of a sudden you're taking a shot over 3 people in the lane instead of kicking it out. All of a sudden, Trey Galloway gets double-digit assists, and Indiana starts winning a little bit. Now, I don't think they scored an awful lot there. I think the credit was more defensively. Second, on defense, I think rebounding. I just don't think Indiana rebounded the basketball extremely well, and they never got in sync in guarding the 3-point line. So when you ask what if I could say 3 things, one, it's offensive 3-point shooting and sharing the basketball, and then defensively rebounding and guarding the 3. Those things I think need to be addressed no matter what kind of roster construction you have. If Indiana's going to improve on 91 KenPom for an Indiana basketball program, I think it's the worst in 12, 13, 14 years, maybe since Tom Crean's first year. And some people like the analytics, some people don't, but those numbers don't lie. That was not a good performance last year. And there was some talent on there, whether it was the right talent. We can discuss that too. If it didn't fit, with Mbako being a 3 or a 4, I think there are some of those, but regardless, the decisions were made, and KenPom was, 91. So those are the quick things that I think need to be addressed. And again, Goody and some of the players coming in can do some things, hopefully, to address those issues on offense. Balo, rebounding, maybe those additions fix some of that, the problems from last year.
On the rebounding piece, I mean, Khalil Ware was an excellent rebounder for the most part last year. Look at his numbers, offensive, defensive rebounding percentage in Big Ten play, and just overall, he was a good rebounder. To me, that's the thing. I'm still kind of questioning how that develops long term, and I think a lot of that's going to come down to how Malik Renew and Mackenzie Mbako grow on that end of the floor. I think Mbako got better as the season went along. I think, and I don't think rebounding is totally an effort thing, but I do think it's kind of a technique and getting a body on somebody and awareness and just kind of having a knack for the ball. I think it's something you can get better at. I thought Mbako did better as the season went along. Renew, to me, is still a bit of a question mark because you've got more of a body of work on him. And I don't know how much of that last season, and we could see the same thing this year. Was it just Khalil Ware was taking so many of the rebounds that Renew wasn't getting those rebounds? We could see the same thing with Ballo because he's basically a walking double-double. But to me, the things you mentioned there as potential areas for improvement, I think the rebounding just stands out for me because I think you've got to be a really good rebounding team, not just on the defensive end, but I think you have to try to go to the offensive glass a little bit more and pick up some easy baskets. I mean, the teams that you look at like a Wisconsin, obviously they don't go to the offensive glass at all, but they shoot the ball pretty well and they don't turn the ball over. Unless you're going to do certain things really well and not make a ton of mistakes, you have to kind of mask some of that by being willing to go to the offensive glass and maybe pick up some second chance points. I mean, you look at the end of a game at a box score, that's one of the things I usually try to look at first is second chance points and how many times you offensive rebounded. And I don't think Indiana, based on how big of a team it was last year, I think the fourth or fifth tallest team in the country on KenPom, I don't think they really used that to their advantage. Would you agree with just the rebounding as a question mark and something that maybe needs to be emphasized really on both ends of the court?
Yeah, I agree on both ends. And Renew had some okay numbers as far as number of rebounds, but there were a number of possessions where he's guarding on the perimeter and he's not a factor rebounding. He's got to go in and rebound. I don't think his effort rebounding was what Coach Woodson probably wants out of him from that 4 position, or if he plays the 5 position. He's got to be a little more aggressive on the defensive rebounding side. I thought Mbako got better with his entire game when he started rebounding more. He was really better on the offensive rebounds. He'd get some off of free throw misses. He was where he ended up last year. If he does that this year, will be a big plus. But I'm not sure I remember a lot of that on the defensive end. He had a knack more on that offensive end. But you're absolutely right. If you break it down in the 10-minute quarters, obviously men don't play that. But if you can get 2 or 3 offensive putbacks, that helps your efficiency, offensive efficiency. That helps, stretch out a game when you aren't making shots. And I think that's something that is sometimes overlooked in a lot of programs. But go get the basketball. And on the back end, guard rebounding is important. So I'm interested to see these bigger guards coming in and attacking the defensive rebound too, because sometimes you just got to. Your bigs got to keep the other bigs from getting it, and then the guards got to go pursue the mid-range or the longer rebound. And Galloway was good at times, but he wasn't consistent enough at rebounding. And I think, so guard rebounding is just as important as your post players. But, Mbako and Renew have to be a piece of the defensive rebounding. And as you pointed out, all of them. I think Ballo's going to help on the offensive rebound. Like you said, he is just a rebounding machine. So I see him getting some points that way, but the others can do that as well. I do think the emphasis on rebounding on both ends will make the difference in a 19-win team to a 23-24 team that's higher up in the Big Ten and gets a good seed in the NCAA tournament. I think that's just a huge piece.
Shooting is something we've all talked about since really Tom Crean left Bloomington. It's not like this is a new problem with Mike Woodson, Archie Miller's teams where poor 3-point shooting teams. And it's not like Woodson hasn't had a couple of Indiana teams that were respectable 3-point shooting percentage, but the volume has always been maybe lower than what a lot of people would like. Should we just kind of reframe our thinking in terms of what Indiana basketball is going to be from a shooting perspective? Should the hope just be try to shoot mid-30s percentage wise and accept the fact that the volume is probably not going to be what most people would hope for? Because the body of work now is such that we've had 3 seasons of Mike Woodson. And, when you ask him about it, he says things like, I need 3-point shot makers, not takers. So to me, it doesn't seem like it's something where he's going to change his philosophy all of a sudden and say, we're going to start taking 25 threes a game. Is the best case scenario for Indiana just better 3-point shooting with the same, maybe a little bit increased volume? Because at this point, it doesn't seem like there's going to be a drastic shift there.
Yeah, I do think for our sanity that we probably do need to expect, below average volume and bringing in some players and hopefully their numbers increase. That the 3-point shot will be better for Indiana at times. last year in that end of the year run of 5 games. I thought they shot in that method right there where they made some threes but didn't shoot an awful lot. Mike Woodson's not going to generate threes. That's not in his MO to run sets, staggered doubles, or flare screens or any of those. And I know we've all called for it for a lot because we see teams like UConn and others running different types of sets to get 3-point shots. Mike Woodson's going to have an offense that gets 3-point shots off of double teams and pick and roll hedges and traps and trying to move the basketball. He believes, and it's not a bad belief, that spacing is important no matter what you believe in as a basketball coach, but he believes in the standing spacing. Put your players in the corner and let 2 people attack, and when they come to double, then you start playing off of that. And that's always going to, I still think you can get more volume. If you watch the NBA, they're shooting a lot of threes. It's usually at the rim or threes. But Coach Woodson doesn't. I don't think he believes in that. That's why I think this team's going to be better because he's got multiple guys on that kick out that can shot fake, deck it, and get to that elbow and pull up and score. And I believe that he really believes that's better basketball. And he now has multiple guys who can play that pull up game and that rim game. And with the guards that in the past, it's been a lot of just at the rim. The pull up game last year was not there. So yeah, I think we're going to get, average to below average volume and hope for better results, because the players can, force, more double teams with the ability to drive the basketball.
One thing I think the volume has been sufficient, but maybe not the percentage good enough, is the free throw shooting, because when the offense that he runs does do a pretty good job of getting guys in advantageous positions to draw fouls and get to the line. But the free throw shooting, to me, was one of the bigger problems offensively last year, because when the primary strength of what you're trying to do offensively is get to the line, and then you can't convert when you get there, you're kind of obviously negating that strength, that advantage that you have of getting to the line. Is that just, I'm curious from your perspective, and I'm sure you've talked about this on assembly call before, and people ask you as somebody that's coached, is that just a matter of guys working on it more? Is it getting in the gym and taking shots? Is it just guys recruiting guys that are already capable shooters? Because you look at Ballo, he's obviously coming in as a guy that's going to get fouled a lot, not a great free throw shooter. So then you start scratching your head and saying, are we going to go through the same thing again next year with more free throw misses? I'm just curious how you look at a poor free throw shooting team or program and what the steps are to remedy that. And I'm sure it's not that Mike Woodson wants his teams to shoot free throws poorly. He obviously wants to make them, but it doesn't seem like it's been something that they've been able to figure out. And is there anything kind of we're missing here, or anything that they could maybe be doing differently to try to fix this problem long term?
I think you just got to get players who are confident enough and to knock shots down. And it depends on who's getting fouled too. Indiana's going to be heavy post play into Ballo, and Ballo gets fouled, and he's not a good free throw shooter. So your team percentage is going to be lower because of who's getting fouled. That doesn't explain Galloway's struggles. But then it becomes a mental issue because, he shows the ability to hit 3-point shots and hit free throws. I said last year I thought Galloway took on a lot of leadership issues and tried to be in 2 or 3 different places at one time with all of the new players. And sometimes you have that, Alex, when you have a guy you trust and is a really solid young man who wants Indiana to do well. He overplays because he's trying to put people in position here, and then all of a sudden he's out of position defensively or whatever. And then you get to that free throw line. It's like, I have to make these. And then it becomes, I don't want to miss. And so I think free throw shooting is technique, and you need to get in the gym and shoot. But I believe Coach Woodson and staff are having them shoot. And there's no coach around it. Yes, there's some drills, run them first, shoot, put pressure situations on players and all of that. And I'm sure that they do that. There's just no way that they don't work on shooting and free throw shooting, and the guys don't go into Cook Hall and put up numbers. But game time is different. The conditioning, the crowd, all of those things. But I do think, again, this is where the roster construction is better. I don't know the percentages. I've, I'm going to dive in November when I start seeing these guys play. But I think, Rice and Carlisle have a chance to get fouled and shoot better than maybe Galloway did. You'll see those numbers come up. And Baco was fantastic at it. They put the ball in his hands in late situations to get fouled. So it's who's getting fouled, and do you have enough guys that when they get fouled, just go and knock them down? And I don't think Indiana's had that for a few years under Mike Woodson, but they haven't had shooting under Mike Woodson or Archie Miller for a while, and I think that correlates well to the free throw line.
Not to pick on Gabe Cupps, but obviously last season he played a ton of minutes, and you look at the box score after a lot of his games, and there's a lot of low numbers or zeros where he, either wasn't scoring at all, maybe had an assist or two, maybe got a rebound, a steal, but based on the minutes that he was playing, his production wasn't to the level of what Indiana needed to be successful on a lot of nights. One reason I think maybe I'm a little more optimistic going into this season is just, I wasn't super high on Xavier Johnson going into last year because he was coming off of an injury, and as well as he played in that late run, his first season in Bloomington, you kind of look at his track record, what he was able to do at Pittsburgh. There was a lot of erratic play up and down, not someone that you really want to be able to rely on, not someone that you're going to be able to rely on to be consistent. And then he gets hurt last year, and you're bringing in a freshman who definitely seemed overmatched at times. So I look at going from that as your point guard to Rice and Carlisle and Galloway, having kind of those three guys in there playing the chunk of the minutes as a reason to be super optimistic about how much better this team can be. Because even with Gabe Cupps playing all those minutes, again, I'm not picking on Gabe Cupps. I'm just kind of stating the facts of what he produced on a game in, game out basis. It wasn't kind of up to par with the minutes he was getting, and the, in and out nature of Xavier Johnson's minutes. Going from that to what Indiana has this year, and with the importance of importance of guard play and how important it is to winning, it makes me optimistic that Indiana can really make a huge leap forward offensively, at least based on going from just really no production at times with Cupps and Johnson's up and down play to getting a guy who was the Pac-12 Pac-12 freshman of the year, first team all Pac-12 guy, and Carlisle, who some are projecting to be a potential NBA guy. I think the improvement going from last year to this year on the guard play especially can really make a huge difference for this team.
I think I agree with that, because I think you have more guards that are in prototypical spots. I love Gabe Cupps. I think he works really, really hard. I'm not sure the dribble drive ball screen offense is his best situation. I think he needs stuff run for him, or getting the ball initiated and coming off a couple staggers and hitting and doing some things like that. And so he's trying to find his way into the system. And I think you saw that when he was thrust into play, that, I think you'll see him be better as a sophomore because he works at it and he's now used to playing the pick and roll and some of those things. But the thing that excites me about Miles Rice, and I haven't watched a whole lot of film on these guys, but his ability to play off 2 feet. So when you talk about Xavier Johnson and Galloway at the point, those guys were get to the rim, off balance shooting, and when they played well, they also kicked it out. When they didn't play well, they took the offense upon themselves and sometimes created some bad shots or some turnovers. I think Miles Rice is a kid who plays with a little more composure in the lane. That's the plus of the pull-up game, that where you have that confidence to stop on a dime and raise up. Galloway didn't have that. Xavier Johnson did a little bit, but his shot was always a little funky on that. He needed a little space to do that. I think you're going to, again, I'll go back to, I'm not comparing any of these guys to Hood Schifino, but when you want to know what Indiana's going to do, Indiana's going to run a point guard off, and Hood Schifino got to the lane. He didn't go in deep where he could be contested at the rim by a shot blocker. He just pull up, and when he hit, boy, Indiana could beat Purdue, number 1 seed at Purdue. He wasn't always consistent that freshman year, and there were games when he missed a lot of those pull-up. But that's the type of thing you get from both Carlisle and Rice. But Rice playing off 2 feet, I think it's Coach Adranya who said this in one of our shows. The ability to jump stop, find Balo on a dump down from the dunker spot, or pivot and find Goody out there for three. That's all going to increase that 3-point shooting and all of that. Mike Woodson believes in good point guard play, as everyone does, but he really needs a dynamic point guard to be able to score and assist. And when he had Hood Schifino, that was his best year. I was skeptical of Xavier Johnson, and I thank him for the years that he came here. But I don't think he was the point guard that Hood Schifino was. And I think Miles Rice in 3 years, depending on how long he stays and with all the stuff we have now, I'm very excited about Miles Rice from what I hear. And the fact that he's overcome some adversity in life, he's gonna take the ups and downs of Big Ten play and playing for Indiana, and he seems just like a tough young man. And so that's what you need from a point guard, and that's really what Mike Woodson depends on, that low post and point guard to be the main two cogs. And so if you play Rice starting and Galloway as his backup and Carlisle at the two, heck yes, I think Carlisle's more of a two than Galloway was. Galloway is a great Indiana basketball player, love him. But I don't know what position is really his best in a college setup. Maybe the three, maybe a 6-man coming off the bench. And he's really made a lot out of his talent. But he's not a knockdown three. He's not a pull-up guy. He's really not a point guard, but he's made himself into a functional point guard. Now we have more people who fit roles. You have Tucker, who can be a scorer depending on how many minutes he gets. You have Mbako. So, yes, I think the talent is there to make that leap. And guard play is the number one thing. And I said it earlier, 9 wings. I mean, you can go 3 deep. If he wants to go 3 hockey subs on the perimeters, depending on, you can have Galloway as a backup point guard, Cups as the third guard, and you just got all kinds of talent. We don't know about Newton coming off his injury, but guards, I've said it overall, and everyone makes fun of me on assembly call for saying it's a guards game. We finally have enough to compete and practice to elevate everyone, I think. And so that is an exciting piece of the roster construction that so far for Indiana.
Yeah, you mentioned the importance of point guard play and how his best team was really the year with Hood Schifino. But even going back to that first season, Indiana didn't really figure it out late in that season until we saw Xavier Johnson with that huge run in the Big Ten tournament. Without that turnaround from that perspective, we're not talking about an NCAA tournament team from that first year. The other thing that I look at with this team that has a chance to be much different is just, you kind of mentioned this with the depth, but last year, I think you could probably go back to find some old episodes of Podcast on the Brink and Assembly Call where there was discussion of, the Caleb Banks potential breakout as a sophomore and the CJ Gunn potential breakout as a sophomore. And there was people that were talking themselves into Peyton Sparks coming over from Ball State and looking at his numbers and saying, he was a solid player in the MAC and how that translates. And I'm not saying there's not some of that with this team in terms of an up transfer in the sense of Langdon Hatton's coming up from, playing at William and Mary and Bellarmine and then coming to the Big Ten. I mean, he's obviously has a lot to prove, but at some of the other spots with Gunn and Banks, nothing against those guys too. I mean, I hope they go on to have great careers at their next stops to Paul and Tulane respectively, but you look at the backups, there's just a lot more proven guys, particularly at this level, taking over some of those minutes. You look at Luke Goody coming over from Illinois, just played on an Elite 8 team and shot the ball really well from the perimeter. Anthony Leal, maybe he plays some, maybe he doesn't, but when he did play late down the stretch last year, he was, making a pivotal tip in the Big Ten tournament to lift Indiana to the next round. He was making that corner 3 at Ohio State and making a ton of just small plays that contributed to winning. And Bryson Tucker, we don't know what he will be, but we do know he was a McDonald's All-American and a top 25 player coming out of high school. So there was enough programs and enough people that watched him to believe that he was a high-level talent. So to kind of make my point here is it feels like Indiana is not banking on, a ton of offseason jumps from certain guys to have that production off the bench. Even in Anthony Walker, who I thought at times was Indiana's best sub last season. There were things you looked at from his profile at his time at Miami and said, why did his playing time go down as his career progressed there? They got some better players, and I don't know how much better he got as his career went along. He did some good things in an IU uniform, but I do think overall, and this kind of in my mind speaks to the strength of the roster overall, is Indiana has more sure things on the bench than it did last year. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, demonstrated play
Right.
is the term that I use. They played. Carlisle played a big role and had, what did he have, a 40-point game at some point
Yeah.
at Stanford, and Rice has demonstrated. So that's important when that the certain players can play. But development is also important, Alex, and
Right.
the Tamar Bates and the Guns have not worked out under Coach Woodson. The high school guys that have come in short of the McDonald's All-American. And I've just said this, and every coach has their way of doing things. And I want to make sure, your listeners understand that Mike Woodson's a coach, and Mike Woodson can do what he wants. And we can all agree or disagree, but he needs that demonstrated talent. And then he's really a lot more comfortable working with demonstrated talent than bringing in. I think you saw a little bit of that with Cups last year. Maybe some reluctancy to play Leal, and then Leal finally had a chance because of injuries. So this year there is a lot more experience coming in that has at least played a year somewhere and has some statistics and has some ability on tape. And I think that's going to be more comfortable in a Mike Woodson system. I think that's a plus.
How much is development a guy like, Tom Crean always gets credit for Victor Oladipo's kind of emergence, but and I do think obviously he was his coach, and I think there's something to that, the relationship, and obviously Oladipo credits a lot of the work that Crean did, and Crean seemed to be pretty honed in on individual skill development and making guys better. But is some of the responsibility too on the player to come in and do that extra work? Because we can say whatever we want about CJ Gunn and Caleb Banks and how maybe they didn't work out under Mike Woodson. Same thing with Tamar Bates, but the coaching staff only gets so many hours in a week to work with these guys. I think in the offseason in particular, Cliff Marshall's spending more time with them than anybody else on the coaching staff because there's limits placed on them how much they can work with them. To me, what separates the players who really take a leap forward and the guys who really get better. Jordan Holes is another example of a guy who really got better over a long period of time in his IU career. And when you ask him or hear him talk about how he got better, it was just he was in the gym constantly getting work in. How much is it the coach and how much is it the player being willing to just sacrifice everything and say, this is what I'm going to spend my time on. This is what I'm going to focus on. And I want to be the best player I can be.
The responsibilities with both. I mean, when you have a key card to Cook Hall, you better be in there as much as possible. It raises a question that I've kind of been mulling over all summer too, with the pay for play stuff too. Do you pay the right guys who want to go use their key card? That would be the best use of NIL money. Is you got guys who just want to knock you down to win, and they're taking your NIL money, or you see it in the pros, guys with nice contracts but never win, and they put up numbers, they play all right, but they're never winning because they're satisfied with their salary. I think college basketball, not just Indiana, college basketball has got to deal with that now because these kids at 18 or 19, I don't know what I would be doing with that kind of money when I was in college, right? So a lot of it's going to be on the player, but there's also the ability to coach. Every coach does workouts and individual workouts and has meetings with players and all of that. But this is stuff we don't know, like what goes on behind the scenes. You have to cultivate an attitude, and then you got to find time to get them in games and manage games and talk them through things, right? So if a kid doesn't want to improve and get better and has a chip on his shoulder because he's not playing, he's not going to develop and he's going to move on. I don't know that was a case with any of these young men or not. But again, you want to see patterns, Alex. You want to see guys, if you're going to recruit high school guys, you want to see them get better and stay. But I also question whether that's even necessary anymore with the transfer portal.
Yep.
Do you want to spend your time trying to develop high school recruits, or do you just want to go out and get people with demonstrated ability, let someone else develop them for a year at your mid-major or at a different college, and then go get those guys, build those relationships in recruiting so you can go get them after year 1 or 2. I think that's really changed. It's hard for a guy like me who's grown up in college athletics being totally different. But is high school recruiting and development a piece of the college game anymore, or is it just going getting talent with NIL money for a year? I mean, Indiana's got to replace 6 people next year regardless, right? I think because of the seniors, the 1 year transfer. So they're already going to have to do that again. So why, I don't know how that's going to play out at Indiana or at Michigan State or at anywhere else. You as a coach now have to change in 2 ways. You have to change, how you recruit and where you're going to go and get that demonstrated ability, or are you going to bring potential in and work with it? Bring those McDonald's All-Americans in, but go get transfers. That might be one path. And then you've really got to be sharp in the summer in merging 6 or 7 new talents with your 4 or 5 left over. I forget which school it was that I just saw had 10 new recruits. Like every year is a boot camp to get your system in. And we've seen success. Kansas State had an elite run, 8 run with a whole new team. Mutz has had some success and failures with rebuilding every year. Calipari with freshmen every year has kind of been on the decline. So if you want to be a good coach in college basketball right now, you better find the right way to get your message and teach these guys in that limited time you do have in the summer. So maybe development of high school players from year 1, 2 to 3 is over for your top level college basketball. That's sad to me, but it is the rules of the game this year, and so you gotta operate in that.
You kind of led me into the last thing I wanted to ask you about, and it's not IU related. It's actually Purdue related because you're up there near that program. I know you went to some games this year and watched that program closely, and then obviously followed them with the bracketology. But you mentioned programs building with high school talent. I mean, Purdue, I believe, only had 1 transfer in last year with Lance Jones, and this year, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they brought anybody in from the transfer portal. They're bringing all new freshmen. So we're maybe going to get a case study right here in the Big Ten on whether or not this model is still sustainable. Obviously, they bring back a ton, but they lose Zach Edey, who 2-time National Player of the Year. There's no replacing a player like that. But the Boilermakers, you still look at some of these early lists. They're high up there in the Lenardi early bracketology. Torvik, I think, has got them in the top 15. Is this just an ode to Matt Painter and what he's been able to do over a long period of time now? Because I do think there's going to have to be some type of step back here with losing Edey and having all these new freshmen. As good as Braden Smith is, as good as Lawyer is, some of these other guys that Trey Kaufman and Wren obviously played really well. Besides maybe Braden Smith, a lot of those guys I just named are role players, and I just don't know that what they have coming back and bringing in all these freshmen, you're going to have a top 10, 15 team next season. Am I crazy for thinking that, or where do you stand on this?
I don't think you're crazy. I think some regression backwards is due because you just can't replace that level of talent, that dominating a player. I mean, he just changed the game. So I think there's going to be some regression backwards. But if I remember right, 2 years ago, when Edey was a sub, going to be a starter, no one thought Purdue was going to be very good and had him ranked as 7th, 8th, 9th in the Big Ten. Yeah. They win the Big Ten and get a number 1 seed. No one knew about Carson Edwards. Carson Edwards came in as a 3-star athlete, led them to an Elite 8 with Trevion Williams at the center. They had a couple down years about 10, 12 years ago. He had a couple, and everyone was asking for him. It will be a test of the new system versus the traditional system of getting old and staying old. And I do think the early rankings are because of the success that Matt Painter's had in that traditional style of basketball, and that we're all just hands up in the air about How do you evaluate it? Bracketology. The one thing I like about what we do is we wait till the games start playing, and if you win, you move up, and you don't. We don't do the Lenardi preseason, and I don't know how he does it because every team has 6 to 10 players that are new.
Yeah.
I guess the guys at some of these national places who know all the players and everything, but I focus on the Big Ten for the most part. And I don't even know who Wisconsin has or all of those until coming to October. And I told Jared this, I'm just going to root for the uniforms now. Like when the uniforms come out, I'm going to relax. And because trying to figure out all of this transfer stuff, Louisville's brought in a whole bunch of guys with
Kentucky's a whole new team.
Arkansas has the number. I just saw rankings, I think 247 or something. Arkansas number 1 transfer, Indiana number 2. Here's the thing. West Virginia, different rankings, but I looked at this in the spring. West Virginia in the last 4 years have had three top 10 transfer classes and never made the tournament. So, you got to put the team, the team together. And so, yeah, it's interesting. I think I lost the train of thought of your last question there, so you might want to re-ask that again.
No, I mean just Purdue. I mean, Purdue.
Purdue, yeah.
In general, I mean, they're due for a regression. I'm just curious, like how much of a regression you think it's going to be. I mean, it's one thing to go from. I don't think it's a huge drop if they're 10 or 15, but to me that just seems high based on what they've got coming back.
I think again, I know this is an Indiana-based podcast and people will get angry at me and send all the things. Like Matt Painter just squeezes out every ounce of ability from the guys that he has in that program. And to me as a coach, again, it's a Purdue coach. I really don't like to say that, but that's coaching, right? To me now, coaching might be changing and go get the talent and use use the NIL money, get the talent. And then that takes a skill too. Like, Phil Jackson was really good as a coach and everyone says he had great talent, but there's only so many basketballs and only shots and you gotta put together that. So coaching with NIL money is a skill just as well as what Matt Painter's doing. But Matt Painter is a thorn in our side as long as he's at West Lafayette. Because I think he just maxes out. And I know Trey Kaufman-Wren's trainer, a local kid here from Rossville that's in the training business, and Trey Kaufman-Wren is 1,000, as most college kids are, but that kid works as hard. I've had the ability to go and be in a couple of the workouts with some of these Purdue guys, and they just have an attitude that I'd be interested to get if I got close to the IU guys to see. These guys got an attitude. They just want to go play, and they want to play for Purdue, and they want to win. And that's cultivated through this trainer, through Matt Painter, and that's that culture that's overused all the time. Will that last? I think this year will be a huge test losing Edey. I happen to think they will be in the running for a Big Ten championship. A top 4 seed in the Big Ten. I could see them falling out talent wise, but it's been interesting. As you said, with the bracketology stuff, we get media passes, the teachers here and students here, we get to go to any and all Purdue games. So we've seen a lot of them playing, and the access that I've had with the training stuff has been remarkable to see. But I think Trey Kaufman-Wren will not be half of Edey, but he will be a force to reckon with.
Yeah, I know they have one big guy coming back that played a little bit.
Will Berg.
Yeah, but then they've also got another, I think, 7-footer that's coming in that's been outstanding so far this summer at one of the Team USA camps. And I already saw one of the national guys say he should have been ranked higher. Yeah, it's to me, it's more the trust in Painter. Because I do think Braden Smith's a great player. I like Lawyer a lot, and I like a lot of the pieces. I think Miles Colvin has a chance to be really good. I think Kanan Catchings coming in as a freshman's got a chance to be really good too. And I agree with you. I think Painter, as much, if not more than any coach in the Big Ten, maximizes every piece of talent. And the other interesting thing, kind of when you look at the transfer portal, Painter hasn't really fully embraced it. The other guy that is the longest tenured coach in the Big Ten this year, I think he brought in 2 transfers, but Tom Izzo is another guy who kind of wants to do things his way. And, it'll be interesting just to see how long both of those coaches can kind of go on with trying to build primarily with bringing in, mostly freshmen and developing those guys. Because the thing that I think can really burn you with the portal now is if you bring in a large class of freshmen like this, and you have one or two that you're kind of developing on the back burner, you don't play a lot, and then all of a sudden you've spent all this time and spent some resources developing this guy, and then all of a sudden, he was the 10th man at, let's say Kansas State, and then all of a sudden Indiana hears about him, or another school with a ton of NIL hears about him and says, they only played you what, 5 or 6 minutes last year. Come here and we'll give you a much bigger role and we'll give you more money. I think that's where, I think if you're a coach where you like the transfer portal, is if you only got a guy for 1 year, you don't have to worry about, improving him over multiple years, and then he potentially leaves, and then you're stuck with nothing. You get a ready-made player, you plug him in, and that's the end of it, and they're ready to go and ready to contribute. Whereas with a freshman, I think there's just a lot of different variables that can happen, and guys leaving now, and it's so easy to go somewhere else. And I think that's something I think to watch for school, even Indiana next year. I mean, you mentioned they're going to have 5 or 6 spots probably to fill. I wouldn't fill them with all high school kids. You got to get 2 or 3 guys that are ready to come in and play right away. Maybe you fill it with 2 or 3 high school kids that, hopefully you can get a Braylon Mullins, you can get a Trent Sisley and in-state kids, or you can get a Jalen Harrelson that, but I think it's a huge roll of the dice what Purdue's doing bringing in 6 freshmen, because I just don't know how you're going to keep all those guys happy and how they're all going to pan out over the long term.
Michigan State with Xavier Booker would be an example too.
Yeah.
Like Booker didn't play a whole lot. Is there someone out there that's saying, "Hey, come to us"?
I'm sure there were. I'm sure there were.
And that's the thing that, not to go off on another topic here, but it's just difficult for me right now to understand the landscape. That I really enjoyed college because it was different than the pro game, with money and trades and all of that stuff. It was just pure, athletic, and not the amateurism. I think the players need to be paid, but I'm hoping with these court cases now that there are some contracts or pay for play where you come in, you sign, here's your NIL, but you're here for 2 years, or a buyout situation. I think that would help the college game, because right now the college game is wild, wild west more than the pros. And I've been saying this on many shows. I'm going to watch Caleb Williams play for the Bears for at least 3 or 4 years, unless they trade him, until his rookie contract is up. Well, there are no rookie contracts in college. I was happy with Rice and Carlisle because they had 3 years of eligibility remaining, but that's the old coach Tonsoni looking at an IU roster. Those guys can be here for a year if they wanted to. And I'm not, there's no rumor or anything behind that, but all of a sudden, as a fan and as someone who analyzes the game, that's not a big piece anymore, that you got a freshman transfer in, where I used to think that was important. You said it best. It's a 1-year roster each year going forward. That's a wild, wild west in college athletics. I'm losing track of all the football transfers and all of that. And that's just the new way of college athletics until it changes. But I hope there gets to be some stability so that we can attach and connect to these players again. I think fans at some point may lose the connection to players who don't stay at least 2 or 3 years in a program and bounce around. We're seeing that with Indiana State, the connection that city and community had, and what an awesome run to the championship of the NIT, selling out Rose Holman, and then bam, the transfer portal and the NIL just exploded, and they're starting from scratch again. So that's a whole nother topic. But as far as Indiana, we're sitting pretty. We have the NIL, we have a coaching staff that's willing to do that, and I do think that's the new way of building rosters. But I think there's no guarantee of stability year from year. You could have a 19 and 14, then Indiana can pop this year, and that doesn't mean they're going to be good next year, because it's a whole new roster. It's going to be hard to build consistent winners, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think the long-term answer is going to be, depending obviously how the system evolves, I think the answer is going to be kind of a mixture of both, right? You want to maybe bring in a couple guys each year and try to develop them, and then you have to supplement that with portal. I don't think you can just go full portal and say, I'm only going to recruit the portal, and I don't think you can just say, I'm only going to recruit high school players. I think it's going to be a mix of those two. But Coach, thank you for the time. Sorry to interrupt your summer vacation on day one, getting you up early here and recording a podcast. But it's always good to talk to you and catch up with you.
Well, thank you very much. I'll hit the golf course tomorrow morning. But this was fun. I appreciate what you do, and look forward to having a lot of good basketball to talk about next year.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody, as always, for listening to Podcast on the Brink. Thanks, everybody who kindly left a rating or review last week on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. Got quite a few of those last week. Would hope we can get some more this week and continue to spread the good word of the show and get more listeners in the show. I think it helps with the algorithms, the more ratings and reviews you get, especially those 5 stars. So keep sending those in, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.